Survival is a challenge that all insects are faced with every day. The danger of being eaten has existed since time began and forms part of the life of insects. That is why nature has given the different species a series of defense systems to make them less vulnerable, which have been developed over millions of years. Defense mechanisms that afford greater importance to ingenuity than strength. Fragility is one of the most obvious physical peculiarities of many insects. It almost seems as if nature had forgotten about them when providing them with mechanisms to defend themselves from external hazards. And yet the protection they have been given lies precisely in their own bodies, which in appearance are so vulnerable. The forest is alive, and eyes could be watching you in any part of it. In the heart of nature, that look could well be that of a predator, but also that of another being that is skillfully hidden from view, so as not to be seen by the eyes of its target. The best way to remain undisturbed is to go unnoticed. This principle has been used by many different insects with excellent results. The defense mechanisms deployed by natural selection can be divided up into two categories: active mechanisms in which insects participate, and passive mechanisms that are put into effect by the color and appearance of these beings in relation to the environment in which they live. These passive defense mechanisms have camouflage strategies that are both surprising and extremely varied. Insects do not have to make any special effort to be safe. The key to defense lies in their own bodies, ever since the day they were born. The forest is alive, and eyes could be watching you in any part of it. Nature has given the species adopting these mechanisms characteristics that enable them to improve the efficacy of the camouflage strategies. Evolution has provided certain chameleon-like insects with the power to change their bodies and appendices, which can be lengthened or expanded to make them blend into the vegetation of the environment where they live. The camouflage is often so good that only the slightest movement will tell us where they are. The importance of camouflage also extends to the insect's behavioral guidelines. Normally they move slowly, in keeping with the scenery in which they are located, and can remain motionless for a long time. This is the final proof of the perfection with which nature develops the camouflage techniques they employ. The great diversity in the ways they camouflage themselves is not only based on what these beings are like, but also sometimes on their color. In fact, many species of insects existing in damp or tropical climates tend to be green, which enables them to blend in with the foliage. Not only are they able to resemble sticks or branches, but also any object that is unattractive to a predator or even to a hungry vegetarian. Something like this leaf that certainly looks quite unappetizing. It looks like it has already been nibbled by other insects, or even worse, it could be also ridden with fungi. Not at all a tasty-looking morsel, at least in appearance. The art of imitating a leaf is used by many species. It must be admitted that this is a disguise that could fool anyone, especially due to the details at the spoiled tip of the leaf. A leaf that is really the wings of this fragile being. Ingenuity must be put to the test to be able to enjoy a well-earned grooming session. The efficacy of the camouflage does not necessarily mean not being elegant. That appears quite obvious in the case of some insects. And as we are imitating a leaf, why not do so by taking into account its most delicate details? Color, shape, veins. It's impossible to detect the difference. But the imitation of some insects is not restricted only to dead leaves, and even less so when we consider the great variety of leaves that exists. Insects know how to adapt their bodies to any of them. In fact, looking like a leaf may be safer than having a robust shield. Again, ingenuity overcomes strength. A moth with wings in a beautiful red shade. It seems difficult that such a bright shade could go unnoticed for a potential predator. And yet the moth only has to close its wings in the shape of a tiny roof for it to look like the bark of a tree. If it should be discovered by a predator in spite of this, the moth would suddenly unfold its wings and the bright red flash would surprise its enemy, enabling it to fly away into the forest. Imitating a leaf or the bark on a tree are just two of the many techniques of nature that can be used in order to go unnoticed. The camouflage techniques used by some of these insects are not limited to merely pretending to be one of these natural elements. These species can also take on an overall resemblance with the environment in which they live. The complicity between insect and environment is such that if the latter were to change, the insects would try to imitate that new appearance. The extent to which that imitation is successful depends on all the physical characteristics of these beings, from the shape of their bodies, legs, head and thorax to their color. The ground is another element that can be imitated. A grasshopper that is apparently not threatened by any danger. The fact is that all the circumstances are in its favor. It usually lives on the ground, and its body normally imitates the colors of its environment to perfection, thereby allowing it to develop in relative peace. This insect is not similar to the ground by nature and must pretend that it looks like it. That is why it covers itself with the aid of its hairy body. This is yet another form of camouflage, but in this case, we shouldn't be deceived, as the insect is actually lying in wait for its prey. We should not forget that it is known as the assassin bug. Few skills are as useful as cunning in hunting, and this larva is particularly cunning. It is known as the lion ant, not because it is an ant, but because ants are its food. After burying itself, it makes a trap in the shape of a funnel and waits for its prey. Sometimes the victim manages to escape, as it is not an infallible system, but the lion ant's patience is usually rewarded. When an insect eventually falls into the trap, the hunter retains it by throwing sand on it, so that the hapless prey slides down the slope of the funnel until it is caught by the lion ant. This is the same system as that used by other larvae. But in this case, the larva traps its prey by using its tail as a lasso. This is a curious system for obtaining food, and we might well imagine that nature has used its cunning to design it. The praying mantis is the best example of an efficient camouflage. It makes no distinctions in its prey. Its instinct makes it one of the fiercest predators in the insect kingdom. Furthermore, it has no doubt about eating the members of its own species if they come within its reach. The sophisticated guises it used to hunt with simply serve to enhance the legend about the fascinating praying mantis family. The bride sits dressed in white on the branch of the flower from which it takes its color. A beautiful and yet sinister image created by nature. The praying mantis family uses the most varied of disguises, and apart from camouflaging itself as a flower, it can also disguise itself as many other elements of nature, adapting its body to the most unlikely forms. In some cases, it must remain motionless for hours to blend in perfectly with the chosen surroundings. But that immobility should not be taken lightly. The predator is not resting, but waiting. And it has all the time in the world. It is also a good idea to have shelter beneath the water. Some insect species have chosen the option of taking their homes with them, consisting of a tube open at both ends. It is made of different materials depending on the species in question. And as they grow, more material is added to this safe hiding place that can only be seen when their heads and feet emerge in order to move. The so-called broken camouflage disintegrates the shape of the animal, allowing it to be confused with its natural surroundings. This is an optical effect that is achieved partly thanks to the shape and corporation of the animal. It can also be useful to break up one's silhouette. The wings of this butterfly have irregular edges, so that when it folds them, it becomes practically invisible against the pine bark that has fallen on the ground. Many butterfly species achieve a perfect camouflage effect by breaking up their silhouettes. However, some insects are able to go even further. This bug lives only on thistles, to which it bears an astounding resemblance. Its well-rehearsed trembling makes it look like part of the plant swaying in the wind. Its nervous movements make it difficult for even the human eye to locate it. More proof of the perfection used by nature in camouflaging insects. Camouflaging pupae adds yet another complication. Until the time of their metamorphosis, they must remain completely still and find a way to hide that is adapted to that waiting period. They take on colors and shapes that allow them to resemble seeds, dry leaves, or buds on branches. A caterpillar and a masterwork of camouflage. The caterpillar remains completely still and pretends to be a stick by hanging onto the branch with its two false back legs and holding onto it. The effect is such that it is almost impossible to distinguish it from the branch. One need only look at this tiny creature to know that it is taking advantage of its color to merge with the plants. At the slightest sign of danger, it stops its odd movement that has earned it the name of pacemaker, and remaining motionless is enough to protect it. Mime is a camouflage technique that consists of one insect imitating another. The overall appearance of these two butterflies is so similar that at first sight it would be easy to confuse them. But they are not the same insect. This phenomenon is common in many butterfly species. The reason for it is because the butterfly being imitated has characteristics that interest the imitator. In this case, its toxicity. Predators know the insect is toxic and will not attack the imitator. Mime may also be centered on the shape and color of insects from different species. Imitating a bee may be a useful resource for a beetle. However, no one will approach it. The imitator takes advantage of the indirect protection it receives through this collaboration. It is of little consequence for the waspfly that it cannot sting. Its appearance is sufficient to ensure that no one will bother to get close enough to find out whether it is actually a wasp or not. Any observer would say that this insect is a bee. However, it is a robust butterfly that has lost some of the scales on its wings, leaving them as transparent as those of a bee, which is much more dangerous. The mime technique obviously gives rise to a doubt. Butterfly or wasp? Which is which? Insects show us time and time again that in their universe, everything is possible. Looking like a frog, a tree, a leaf, the camouflage techniques developed by nature effectively corroborate that ingenuity is often more powerful than strength. But there are other ways to avoid danger. All of them require the instinctive behavior of the animal. They are active defense mechanisms which in themselves constitute a separate world. Hiding from an enemy is the oldest safety method dictated by the instinct of all living beings. Some insects take advantage of the first crack they see to scuttle away from potential dangers. The old wives' tale according to which the earwig enters the human ear and drills a hole in the eardrum with the pincers most probably lies in this complex defense system. Hiding in the ground seems the safest method of all, and also the easiest if it is done with the impetus of some beetles. But even something as simple as hiding below the ground can be done in many different ways. For example, like the cricket. They neatly tunnel holes in the ground, but the aim is not to hide from a special peril, but to remain safe permanently. In fact, they only emerge from the surface when they need food or to reproduce using the characteristic sound of their wings. The hiding place may also be permanent. The fragile larvae of some beetles are hidden in wood and remain there until they reach adulthood. Their only function is to feed, and their hiding place, the wood, is also their food. It thus seems logical to stay there permanently, safe from predators. There are certain larvae that also hide, but adopt humus or decomposing vegetable matter as their home, in which they bury themselves completely. In the case of many adults, their food also marks the place where they tunnel their homes. Once the larder is empty, they find another, and the whole process is repeated. Making a fast escape is also a good defense. But it's always a good idea to have shelter underground. Among the creatures inhabiting the subsoil are different species of crickets that are more sedentary types. They tunnel their homes underground and stay there permanently. They grow, live, and reproduce there without ever leaving it. These creatures have many different ways to hide in the ground on which they move. However, no place below ground is as safe as the refuge of flying insects. Flying has always been one of the decisive elements in the successful existence of these creatures. A predator has little choice when, after attacking it, the beetle or insect in question spreads its wings and takes flight. The defense tactic used by the spider beetle lies in staying together. The attack of a predator is solved by allowing it to capture one, but this enables all the others to escape. The hasty procession of the bugs based on tactile and olfactory communication with their antennae is quite an unusual example of gregarious behavior in the insect kingdom, but some species of bugs often use it. They do this for reasons of safety. In the face of a sudden attack by a predator, the group starts fleeing, and this momentarily confuses the attacker. They have a slight possibility of escaping that a young bug on its own would not have. The composition that forms the external skeleton of the beetles has provided them with strong defensive weapons. The well-developed horns of some of them not only have functions related to sexual behavior, but also an effective weapon in the event of a fight, which on most occasions never takes place. The enemy flees on seeing the power of its adversary. In the insect kingdom, beetles' jaws are the symbols of force as a defense system. Another important defense system are spines. The insect walks along unnoticed. Its physical constitution makes it possible for certain species to do this and emerge with the vegetation. But that perfect disguise is also a dangerous defense weapon. The appearance of certain species in itself is sufficiently threatening apart from any defense weapons it may have. Apart from the respect imposed by the presence of this insect, the males of this species have two hind spurs that they use to stab their enemies when attacked. Their spurs are so effective that the natives of Papua, where this insect is found, use them as hooks for fishing. This insect may adopt certain threatening postures that scare their enemies, and also emit a pungent odor that frightens them away. The habitual fragile appearance of caterpillars does not mean they are lacking in effective defense mechanisms. The sharp spines that cover the bodies of certain species are a physical feature that is extremely useful for threatening their attackers. Despite their hapless appearance, caterpillars are not interested in camouflage. However, when trapped, they cannot escape. This apparent contradiction appears to be made worse by the spectacular colors that make them stand out. But in addition to using their spines, caterpillars also put their trust in the toxic appearance of their colors. Red and black, yellow and black, representing danger, representing a poisonous animal. These colors, this striking aspect could draw the attention of a predator. But the color combination indicates that it is toxic, and it would not be wise to get close to it. It knows that all other species know the meaning of that combination, and for that reason it is able to eat and move around in complete peace. Once again, the wasp, or the coloring of the wasp, lends a hand. The caterpillar feeds off a plant that contains toxic substances to which it is immune, which build up in its body and are later transmitted to the butterfly. Precisely due to that quality in caterpillars, many species of butterflies contain toxin in their bodies and also the warning colors. Curiously enough, several cases occur in which that color is yellow and black, as in the case of the caterpillar, and red and black when the insect reaches adulthood. The warning colors are an effective system that makes the insects bearing them practically immune to attacks by predators. The dangerous significance of that color combination is well known in the wild, and that warns the enemy off. And as opposed to warning colors subtly applied to defense methods, chemical defense. A bug is the ideal example of this option. The chemical components in the body of this tiny creature not only have a foul odor, but their taste is also extremely unpleasant. This is a defense mechanism that almost always warns of its presence, since its objective is mainly to dissuade. The insects know the toxic perils that lie behind the combination of these colors. Many species use one form of defense or another based on the chemical components of their bodies. And of these species, more than 50,000 are insects. Naturally, caterpillars belong to this group. They often defend themselves using the toxic hairs that cover their body. When they are touched, they cause irritation or allergies that can also affect humans. The assassin bug is a predator with a strong sting. Its potential victim is a caterpillar loaded with repellent chemicals. After much hesitation, the predator decides not to attack. It knows what the consequences will be. Each creature goes its own way. Certain pupae use similar defensive methods by segregating repellent substances, but in the event of being attacked, some make contorting movements. There are also some beetles who fabricate their own defense. Their bodies produce substances that, depending on the species in question, may be corrosive or irritant, which they store in special glands. When danger is imminent, the beetle squirts a jet of liquid against the predator, allowing for time to flee. Stinging. A defense system which, in the case of bees, causes the death of the bee itself if it stings an invertebrate with soft tissues, as the sting itself is joined to the digestive tube that is torn out when the bee stings. Wasps, like bees, emit volatile substances that are instantly captured by their colleagues, which attack the enemy in a swarm. Stings are the ideal mechanisms for injecting toxins and are often great works of morphological elaboration. A great defense mechanism, the markings on the wings of butterflies. Butterflies move their wings in such a way that the markings appear suddenly, confusing their enemies. These markings on the wings of butterflies have unsuspected defensive advantages. Located in the center at the edge of the wings, they look like the eyes of a larger animal. The predator then decides to go off in search of smaller prey. In a situation of danger, the butterfly spreads its wings, and it is the enemy's turn to feel threatened by that non-existent larger animal. These are not the only elements that are used to scare off hunters. The head of the crocodile butterfly has been developed to achieve a threatening appearance. Other butterflies have extended their wings to form long tails that have a defensive function. Together with the markings, they give the butterfly an appearance that succeeds in confusing the predators, which attack the tail, tearing off a fragment, while the butterfly escapes. There are also certain caterpillars that seem to be what they are not. Strategically located at the end of their abdomens is a mask they have been given by Mother Nature to frighten off their enemies. This disguise is completed with an inoffensive spur, which, however, bears a considerable resemblance to a beak. Stick insects enjoy their protection actively and passively. Their camouflage means they are not attacked, but unexpected events sometimes arise, and then the insect uses the age-old technique of playing dead. Their instinct lets them know that a lifeless body will not arouse the interest of a hunter. And when the danger has passed, well, off they go. Certain beetles also use this technique, but they may experience problems later. Their hard skeletons make it hard for them to turn over, and they must use their wing covers again and again to return to their normal position. Ecological balance is the primordial objective of nature. For that reason, it has given insects many defense techniques which, however, are not infallible. Sometimes insects manage to avoid danger, but sometimes they don't. Whatever the order to which they belong, their diversity and beauty are always patent in the image of this butterfly. And yet in the particular beauty of these creatures, there is also an underlying purpose in the danger of extinction that threatens them. A danger that could jeopardize the delicate moment at which a butterfly emerges, considering that the butterfly is a symbol of all the creatures that claim their place on Earth. Perhaps that butterfly no longer exists, or is at that same instant only a vestige of the past. The felling of the rainforests on Earth, or the inevitable disappearance of thousands of species among these tiny creatures, all irreplaceable elements of the ecological balance. They, like other living species, run the risk of disappearing due to the ignorance of those other inhabitants of this beautiful planet called Earth. We humans. The fragile image of a butterfly sums up that danger better than anything else. The person who discovered this delicate butterfly in the mid-19th century, which he named Graciela Isabelle, wanted to show his admiration to British loyalty by giving it this name as a tribute to the Queen of England. Little did he know that his fascination for the prodigious 3 lives in one of this being would be brutally destroyed by man hardly 1 century before its disappearance. Those 3 lives in one, so magically represented in the body of any butterfly, invite us to reflect on the case of this peculiar, delicate creature that disappeared years before. Unfortunately, this is not the only case. With his whole future in front of him, man is capable of building monumental works, but also of destroying astounding, diverse kingdoms that are non-existent only for those who are not able to see worlds that, although minute, were inhabited by creatures from this planet long before any other living being existed.